All right, great. So, Scottish whiskey is a very big thing, but you've got these regions. We've gotten to know Islay quite well for its smoke. You yourself represent a Highland whiskey. Can you tell me what makes a Highland whiskey?
Yeah, so we've got, in the Highland district, we use a lot of bourbon casks. So you get a lot of the sweet honey flavours from these casks. Compared to up north in the Speyside, you're going to get a lot more sherry notes coming through in the whiskey because they use a lot of sherry wood. Mm-hmm. With the Highland malt, I think it's actually very accessible for people that aren't very into whiskey to become accustomed to the taste because the flavours are much more delicate. But that's what I would probably think of a Highland whiskey.
So you mentioned different casks for the whiskey. Can you kind of guide me through what that means for the sort of uninitiated? What sort of different casks, what kind of effects do they have?
So if we have a bourbon cask, which is the most common you'd use from America and Kentucky, this was we use this most commonly because during the Prohibition they limited the cask use to one use in America. So we buy the casks from Kentucky and we get to use them 3 times for their flavour.
Okay.
So these casks are about 80 to 100 pounds. They're not as expensive as the sherry casks, which can be way over £1,000, 800 to £1,000. And also in Spain and Portugal, they can use these multiple times. So with the bourbon casks, they're more common, and they have a very distinct flavour. They both have their distinct flavours. I think bourbon cask has much more of a sort of entry level flavour. You know, like for people that are getting into whiskey, to drink bourbon cask whiskies, you get that sweet honey vanilla, which is a very common flavour within food. You know, like you get that sweetness and the coming from the bourbon, whereas the sherry is a much more. I think a lot of people that like sherry cask whiskies, it's much more of a specific flavour that's more acquired. It's got a much more punchy, robust flavour, and definitely you can smell it from when you have a sherry whiskey. You know, you smell right away that it's a sherry cask.
All right.
And also we have the oldest organic whiskey on the market, which is our 15-year-old.
Oh,
so that's something new that we've done at Easton. So
organic whiskey. What is organic whiskey? What makes it different from a non-organic whiskey?
So it comes straight from the ground up. So from the soil that the barley is grown in, it's organic, certified organic, to right through to the whole distillery. The whole distillery is cleaned before it is the organic whiskey is made. So the one we have from the year 2000 was when it was distilled. So in the first few weeks of the year 2000, we began making this spirit, which has now been released last year.
So how does in terms of flavour, like, does an organic whiskey have something that makes it stand out from the rest, and why would that be?
Yeah. So because you're not using previous casks that have been used for other spirits, like our bourbon or sherry casks, we have to use wood that has been stripped of all remaining spirit that was non-organic.
Okay.
So what this gives you is a more delicate flavour. You really taste the barley, and you're not getting so much from a previous spirit in the wood like you would with a bourbon or sherry. So it's definitely a much more delicate flavour, and it's nice to be again, if we're talking about people that are trying to get into whiskey, it may be one that you could look towards. It is more expensive, but it's something that's
so organic whiskey is a kind of easier, more approachable whiskey.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
It's people that are very into whiskey, though, they might look at it and say it's not got the flavour that I want from a whiskey. It's not got the heavy sort of sherry kick or the bourbon flavour, but it's just that you can't have, unless they make an organic bourbon and then make an organic beef. That could become something in the future.
All right, but for now it remains light and delicate and very interesting. All right. Unchill filtered is a word that we see a lot on whiskey bottles. Now, what exactly is that? What is chill filtration? What is unchill filtration? Why does it matter?
It's actually, for me personally, it's one of the most important things when looking at a whiskey, because it's going back to the traditional method of leaving those oils in the whiskey. So it began when they were shipping whiskey over to America, and they were in cold storage, and they'd get the bottles and they would be white, or they would have the whiskey on ice and it would be white because it's all these fats, the oils, the esters from the wood is solidifying in the whiskey. So when you chill filter, what you're doing is, before bottling, you chill the whiskey, the oils solidify, you sieve off those oils, and it leaves you with a clear whiskey.
Okay.
And that will then remain clear when you add ice to it.
Yeah.
However, in Scotland we don't have it with ice. I know in Asian and American markets they do those. So a lot of the whiskies over there will have to be chill filtered on a global scale. However, locally in Europe and in Scotland and the UK, it's slightly frowned upon to have your drink with ice, probably because the climate and the temperature, it's not hot enough to really want ice anyway. It's usually to warm you up. So.
But how does that affect the flavour?
Absolutely. You're leaving those oils that are naturally come from the wood and from the distillation, you're leaving them in the whiskey. And when you see the spirit being distilled, it is very oily. Actually, in fact, when it comes out of the stills into the spirit receiver, you see sort of horrible bits of oil, like black oil. It's very bizarre, but this all gets cleaned up when it goes through the process. But it's very important that you keep those oils and the esters from the wood, because when you char the wood, there's oils coming out of the wood, and it's got that lovely natural vanilla flavour that is extracted from the wood. So it's very important that you're removing something that's natural. It doesn't make sense to me.
All right, fair enough. Whiskey is often judged by its colour. Some say wrongly. They say they add colouring to whiskey. What is that?
So with a lot of whiskey brands, they'll use colouring in their whiskey. In particular, blends will always generally use colouring in their whiskey to make it appeal like it's a darker colour, which is an aged whiskey. So the longer you leave a whiskey in a barrel, the more colour it's going to take on. And even if the barrel's been recharged, so the inside is still recharged, it can give it the colour. However, you add colouring to whiskey when you don't have that natural, gold colour from the amber colour from a bourbon that's been in for 12 years or 20 years, or a sherry that's been finished off for a good few years. So colouring, you usually use caramel colouring, and it's purely for aesthetic purposes.
Does it affect the flavour?
The colouring won't affect the flavour, no, but it certainly hasn't got that natural feel to it. When you look at our whiskies, you see that the younger ones have less colour, the older ones are darker. You see the colour between the sherry and the bourbon. You see, even the difference between types of sherry and port and red wine, and you get different. It's beautiful to see the colours, I think, but certainly with a lot of whiskies you have to add colouring, because if they're younger and they want to appeal to a certain market, then they would add some colouring.
All right. Well, that covers pretty much the kind of basics of Scotch, I suppose. So, got one more question for you. If you had to drink something, your absolute favorite, top number one drink, what is your drink of choice? Are you a company man through and through, or are you into a bourbon?
I think I'm a big whiskey man. I really love whiskey, and that's only because I've been working in whiskey that you appreciate it even more. Because when you see the people that make it and the time it takes to make it, you really appreciate the drink more. So I love to sit down with a whiskey, but one of my favourites would probably have to be, I love Bunnahabhain 18-year-old. This is the same company I work in. It's hard to not be biased, because I do love who I work for, and I choose who I work for because I love the whiskey. I wouldn't work for a company in any spirit or drink that I didn't enjoy myself. So I think Bunnahabhain 18 is one of my all-time favourites, which is lovely, really lovely sherry flavour. I also like Glendronach. I have a few Glenfarclas from up in Speyside, which I really like. Glenfarclas. I like the traditional methods they use at Glenfarclas, and it's family owned as well, and they still keep their stills with the flame and the fire. So there's some techniques that I love in those whiskies, but yeah, I would say Bunnahabhain 18 is one of my favourites.
So a sherry man through and through.
Yeah, a sherry man. Yeah, definitely sherry. And I don't like smoky whiskies. It's not something that my taste is. I'm acquired to. But I can drink smoky ones, but just not my favourite.
All right. Well, thank you for your time and thank you for your answers.
No problem.
Kirkas Hetki, tässä on kertaa. Ciao.